and then I will introduce you as part of that.
Recording in progress.
Hey, welcome back to another great edition of Account-Based Friday. We've got a special guest by way of Serbia, now in San Diego, Tamara, who is a former athlete and now head of demand generation at Vena Solutions. We're in for a treat today to talk about what's happening in the world of demand and a little bit about the mindset of an athlete of coming over into the demand gen role. But first, every week we start off with a poll. And you can see this week's poll, we are kind of taking an interesting question about what is the handoff between the BDR or SDR function and the account exec function. And you can see I've got three choices here. The majority was the opportunity side. I was in the minority where I said accounts were the unit of currency. We're personally big on accounts because we think it kind of cleans things up, but we know it's kind of progressive. Like a lot of people are either in the lead model or in the opportunity model. I'm curious, Megan, when you saw this question, what was your reaction to either the poll or the responses?
Yeah, well, I think it's good in that, you know, at least they're handing over opportunities primarily, right? That's something that's a little further qualified. I was actually in the camp of handing over leads still, so we're kind of early in our demand evolution. So what we send over is basically an inquiry, a hand raiser, and we're building from there. I can see where, you know, the account language isn't as adopted. That's, I think, still a little bit of a newer way to think about what you're handing over. And I think the trick is, you know, Tamara, before we went live, right, we were talking a little bit about sales and marketing not always being aligned. And I think the definition of opportunity is where understanding of what they should be receiving. So would be curious actually to get your take on that. What was your vote and what do you think?
Yeah, thank you, first of all, for having me. And yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes, like, if you have a blurry lines and they're not clearly defined, that's where the issues happen. So I would say, like, first thing being is like defining those blurred lines in terms of like what is an opportunity, what does lead, or in our term at Vena, we call it hand raiser. What does that really mean? Thankfully, at least on Vena side, we have an amazing person, VP of SDR team, who I'm kind of working on these guidelines. And on the top of like having clearly identified like lead versus opportunity and what does that entail from marketing to SDR, SDR to sales, we also like defined like even the rules on, well, anticipation, like how fast can you approach different types of inbound that can come in, right? So how fast can we act on some of that where the intent is very high versus like somebody who raised a hand from one of our webinars or coming to what Vena has, the Plan to Grow community for finance professionals. So also that's something in consideration that needs to be ironed out. So I highly suggest it.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, kind of a lesson learned, which I think you're hitting on that we've seen as well. It's the definitions really matter, and then making sure that the rest of the organization absorbs those definitions. It's kind of like a constant process. You got to keep reminding people, like, this is what the definition is. This is your responsibility, and it's a lot of work. So I think you're kind of emphasizing that same thing of it is a lot of work to kind of get from point A to point B. You know, given your demand gen perch and your views, what are you seeing that's working right now? Because it's a really challenging environment for marketers to be reaching out, and you guys are growing, or at least it looks like from my sources are telling me that unlike a lot of other companies that are kind of flailing around right now, you're actually doing okay. It looks like outside looking in, you know better, but what's working, what's not working from a demand gen perspective?
I'm very fortunate at Vena. So yes, growth is at full speed. With us, we didn't slow down. We don't intend to slow down. Priorities that we have for FY23 for us will be FY24 will kind of remain the same, but we are trying more and more to kind of have that full ecosystem of like capturing demand, creating demand. So some portion of it is obviously in capturing demand, and then how do we create demand for the future? I think that has been in works, thankfully, by our leadership team for a few years now. So I'm kind of capturing, as I joined Vena 8 months ago, on that momentum and just like accelerating. I think I mentioned earlier with you is like now with me on board, kind of the keyword that we wanted to use is like, how can we be more efficient? How can we be more focused? Leaning into 2023. Thankfully, again, we use our own software to stay lean, like planning, predictive revenue, all of that goodness. So we are very fortunate in that way. But really, staying focused will be the keyword moving into next year, and like efficient in terms of how do we collaborate between revenue teams? How can we be focused? I think I mentioned or shared earlier, one thing that we're doing is like, as an organization, we're shifting into our like go-to-market approach from MQL to MQA, market qualified accounts. That will make us more lean, more focused as an organization between revenue teams. And when I say revenue teams, to say marketing, sales, and also CS or customer success.
I love that you're working with customer success.
Of course.
Actually, can you say a little more about that? Because I think that's something where not enough demand leaders sort of see that as an opportunity, but it really is. I'd be curious to know how you're working with them, what kinds of things they're doing to contribute to demand versus what you're doing to help them contribute to demand. Anything you could share would be great.
Yeah. I think, Megan, you're touching on a great point. A lot of current demand gen marketers like kind of stop their function at MQL or where that handoff is with sales. I think the topic is like being a modern marketer. How does that entail? I really urge anyone to think beyond that MQL or that transition of the, hey, my job is done. Here you go. This is yours. Like, is that opportunity or MQL? I and my team and the pod that I'm leading, I really, really try to push them to think through full stages of sales, like all stages of sale, and having conversations and aligning and understanding where are the hiccups, what are the conversion rates, where can we plug yourself and like help. But that doesn't stop either, because from a full life cycle approach, then you really have that CS segment as well. So I mentioned earlier, we have the community, right, that we're growing for finance professionals. So this is our investment, allowing our audience to grow with us. So it's from emotional standpoint, right, they're being invested. Customers are also coming in to learn more. So it's kind of like, A, you get to connect with peers. 2 is share the best practices. If some organizations have issues with transitioning, being more like efficient coming into next year from a finance standpoint, they can, do that within our community. So plan to grow community is kind of like our investment into that future growth, growing with our audience in a sense. And then a lot of customers can be part of it. That's just one segment that I can touch on. That could be like reflecting to this group.
Yeah, and just thinking back to, you said a lot of interesting things, and that, and even previously too, about the efficient growth and kind of the, if I heard what you were saying, it sounded like you were transitioning from the lead model to the account model, and the reason you were doing that is efficiency. Can you double click into that a little bit more as to how you're seeing that more efficient? Because in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, there's a lot of work to move to a marketing qualified account and moving toward that model. Can you do both? Is it an either or do you go, all in one? Like, how are you guys thinking about it as an efficient type approach?
Yeah, when I say efficient, it kind of stays within that range of being very focused. So as a part of G2 or go-to-market motion, right? Knowing at the beginning as a startup, you really don't know your ICP, you're kind of discovering. Then you move a little bit, you grow, you kind of have a good definition. The last portion is where we are at. Like, we really understand our ICP, our buyer, and then we narrow that scope even in terms of like technology, right? And what industries we close really fast. So when I say efficient, is like us as an organization understanding our ICP and really markets that we can serve really well, that also resonates in revenue. So that's what I think when I say efficient in terms of as an organization, as a revenue team moving into next year.
So I'm interested to hear, one of the discussions that I've been having lately is around at what point can you move to an account-based model? And you mentioned, part of that is refining your ICP, really knowing who you need to be engaging with. How have you made the case for making that shift, and what kinds of questions did you need to answer on the way there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish I had that answer for you in full transparency. This is something that my CMO, Alison Monroe, will probably answer better. We are just on a very beginning stages, I would say 3-4 months in. Technology came into play as well, right? Like understanding and leveraging the data so we can have those efficient plays, really capturing on those companies that are in market and understanding how are we moving the market within the accounts, who are maybe visiting, who are we targeting, who are we not touching, and how do we have to define or create different plays to engage them. So again, better question for my CMO, honestly, but I hope I can give you a more clear answer one year from now, because then we will really evolve and that approach will kind of take a full swing. So I can probably speak more to it. We're just in infant stages in the transition, and we have a building blocks now that we are trying to add up to move into that.
Well, I definitely want to keep in touch and see how it goes. And you mentioned too efficiency. Are you seeing any of the other demand marketers that you've connected with? And I know you do a lot of different speaking and other events and things. Are you hearing budgets tightening up going into next year?
Certainly, yes. There are organizations who even, it really depends how this financial planning was done. If the company did overhire or didn't really have a good pulse on their financials, they might be kind of putting some pause on seeing how the 2023 and this economic current stand is shaping up. Again, I'm very, very fortunate at Vena. We have a really good executive team, and their planning is spot on. We have been delivering on a lot of things, and we are really not willing to put any brakes. We're just accelerating. So I know not a lot of organizations are in that state, but I'm thankful that Vena is, and we are kind of propelling forward.
To that point, yeah.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, just to that point, how do you see the shift in your marketing budget as you're thinking about next year? Are you allocating in any differently, maybe this year or this coming year than perhaps in the last 2 years of growth, into more measurable areas or more, digital or more physical events? What's changing year over year?
I can't give you answer for Vena specifically because I don't have the 2 years of historic data to tell you. I wish somebody who, my right hand, her name is VP of Demand, Chevy, she would probably have that historic knowledge to give. So I wish I can be hey, come on live and answer this question, or somebody from our marketing leadership team. But I can speak generally in terms of the shift on the market, John. So do you mind just repeating once
absolutely.
again
That's fine.
Do you mind just repeating your question once again?
Yeah. So a lot of demand marketers now are faced with a different buying dynamic, right? Your buyer has shifted dramatically here in this post-COVID world. And I would imagine the demand gen tactics are probably also shifting a little bit from maybe a year or two ago where it was growth at any cost to now the efficient growth. So there's probably some tactics that are changing overall. And maybe you may not have the history, but you may be thinking about or planning going into the year, hey, I'm really going to look at intimate events or physical events as an example. So I was just curious, either trends that you're hearing or seeing, or what you might be planning for that you think may be working.
Yeah, I can give you 2 examples here. So one example would be, like you mentioned, you touched on the events. Post-COVID era, people have this kind of get tired and fatigue from Zooms and virtual events. So we are right now into planning, like how do we allocate more budget to more in-person, smaller type of events, or offer, like we had a big accelerate event once a year, like 5,000 people register, like very big for finance professionals. So right now we are thinking about for the next year, can that be in-person plus virtual to accommodate like how we are moving? So that's one, like understanding how people are currently processing some of the channels within marketing, like mentioning fatigue, Zoom fatigue is real. So like, let's kind of scale back there and like push more in person. One. Second thing is, I think I shared this, but I'm happy to share it generally, like for the group. We know that SaaS business or business, so like in marketing space, I can talk on that. It's getting busier and busier, meaning more startups, more companies bidding, more companies investing money in Google, LinkedIn, and that trend is just going to continue next 2 years. So the cost per opportunity or per like lead will increase and will continue to rise. So how do you answer for that? So currently I'm working with a digital team. I think the shift is happening where instead of like investing so much in paid channels, like how can you take some money and maybe devote it to creators? Creators can be influencers. It can be creators in a space or people who can influence your buying decisions or your ICPs within your space to gain their trust and push them over the line. I think that's something that I advise our digital team to do and have into consideration as we move into next year.
Yeah, I love the thinking about what's appropriate at what stage. And I'm curious, as many of us are making that shift back to in-person events, how is your team positioning those? Do you see them as top of funnel? Do you use it throughout the buyer's journey? Where do you sort of tend to see events as contributing the most?
Contribution is one, obviously bottom of the funnel, we tie itself to revenue, but we have different objectives. I mentioned our community, plan to grow community. We really have a spectrum of different series that accommodate different ICPs. So CFO Confidential answers to our CFO buyers. And we have like something that's called Excel Nerds. That's like for really like our users of the platform who want to excel their skills. So top of the funnel, right? Then we have something that's more product heavy. Think about bottom of the funnel, like we have a series called Vena with Evan. So that's kind of more bottom of the funnel, more revenue. So having an understanding of objective you're trying to accomplish between top of the funnel, middle, and the bottom, it's very important because then your KPIs are different based on the motion you're trying to achieve. So we kind of have a spectrum of different things for different, accommodating different audience, our audience within our community. So that's the approach we are taking, really tailoring content to resonate. So Megan, if you're like CMO, you have different pain points than somebody who is director of marketing or a marketing manager. So we are accommodating for that and creating content around those topics that are of interest to you to really resonate with you. And that way we can engage you, your emails opens are higher because we're just hitting on the point. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. We're not there, trust me. We're working on this, but that's kind of like that vision and the goal we're trying to achieve.
I imagine with that goal, there's a lot of collaboration with sales, and in your role, I don't know if you have any advice for questions that you ought to be asking of sales to get to that alignment or to get to that shared understanding. Like, what's that dialogue with sales like?
Again, it starts really with the culture. It starts with people. Who are you hiring? So when I was onboarded with Vena, they understood that one of my strengths is like aligning with sales, but we also brought new people, like I mentioned, our VP of SDR team, Murtaza, who understands marketing really well, knows the channel. Like if I say G2 inbound or software advice or things of that nature, he understands what that is. And it's great to have this conversation of people in place who understand each other to some extent or are really eager and willing to understand each other. I think it starts with really hiring, putting right people in place. That guarantees you like they will open the door for that further alignment. But that's a step one. Step two is like creating or devoting the time for that alignment, right, between both teams, and like having clear, not objections, but like clear objectives that we can align as a team and work towards to, from SDR and then into sales. For us, that has like SMB, mid-market, and we have enterprise, so they're completely different. I'm leaning more into mid-market currently because we kind of started to serve best at market at the moment. But when it comes to like questions you're asking, one of the really early conversations I had with our lead on the mid-market segment was, well, tell me more about your funnel. And we started there. Tell me more, where are you bleeding right now? And he said, look, we have this stage, between this and this stage, and this and this stage. And then I went back with my team to the drawing board. I was like, how can we solve for this? Then ask about velocity. What's our velocity right now in terms of days? Where it should be? How can we accommodate for that? How can we insert marketing to help? So example I can give you that just recently, a program that went live. I call it, and previously I leveraged it, it's like mid-sale acceleration play. So like stages 4 to 6, if you get stuck in legal contracts, you name it, marketing can kind of push like a gifting of some sort and say to our ICP or prospect, hey, we're totally on the finish line. I really want to thank you for like working alongside. As a small token of appreciation, here is like a gift from Vena. And it's kind of like mentality and like emotional shift, like we're so excited and we're setting the tone. Megan, this answers your question about customers, like sets the tone how we are as a team going to work and treat you when you become customers. So that's like becoming or being and really exercising that customer-centric model of the company. So shifting that, like having that gift kind of shift the mentality of like, oh, they're so kind. Let me like follow up with legal. And now we're kind of measuring that, like how much are we making impact with the velocity because of display, things of that nature. So now we're building more plays, more alignment, as you can imagine. Like this, we launched, I think, on 12th. We already have like 6 or 7 amazing responses from prospects. Like in all, like this is so, thank you so much, so kind. Sales is obviously like super excited about this. And when you start to get them excited and they're asking for more, you know you're doing something right as a marketer. So that's kind of how I always.
Yeah, right on. You know, pleasing a tough crowd is always a really great feeling. Speaking of teamwork, you know, one of the things that you shared with us when we were chatting before the session today was that you were a former elite college athlete, and that I would think has given you some really interesting lessons that you've been able, I presume, to carry forward into your leadership style and into your collaboration style as a professional. Tell us about that transition. What was that like, you know, going from elite athlete to business professional, and any ways that you've been able to take your learnings and apply them?
Yeah, transition. Oh my God, that was like 2013. I think that's the year when I kind of wrapped all of that up. So 10 years ago, almost. We're getting on a decade here. Hard. I was just like, loss of identity is real. Then when you think about, oh my God, I just like invested 13 or 14 years of my life into something. How do I now build something from scratch? When really like you know you invested so much of yourself. Like, how do I propel myself to stay? But a lot of these things as an athlete that I at least took or learned, I shifted that into what I call like V2 of Tamara, like business Tamara. Persistence. I think I mentioned openly a few times, like there were a few points in my career where I wanted to give up on marketing altogether. So people said they're glad that I didn't, but you really hit those breaks, and like the persistence and perseverance as an athlete in me to not give up and keep carrying on kind of thankfully overpowered the give up motion. So it really pays off. So persistence is one of the things when it comes to the team and being a teammate. I think I can translate that into why I tend to lead into or lean on revenue teams. Like I mentioned, sales and customer success. we know when we work together, the revenue impact is higher and is better for organization. It's same in volleyball. It's not any different. When we work with one team, the results will follow. So I take that mentality from volleyball. In my just general like managing sense, obviously giving room, being very room for people on my team to grow, really investing into their growth and like having those conversations. Well, tell me what contributed to your growth in the last 2-3 months. Where are you heading? If you don't, can I help you and really evaluate the direction? So guidance and all of that came really from volleyball because those are the discussions we're having, like really early on, like, hey, I want to be on this team. And like, well, let's work towards that and help solve for this. So you are able to join this team, things of that nature. So those are some of the examples that came from volleyball world that I still carry today.
That's a fantastic story too. And John pointed out here in the comments that you've got multi-role skill sets of playing offense and defense. And you may have another skill set too, because I think earlier you were saying you had very little English coming to the US. I mean, that's no joke of a transition either. So not only did you do the Division I transition, but I would imagine there was a transition coming to the US as well.
Yes, let's see. It was very hard to lead. I am like kind of came from Serbia as a leader, really strong with my like technical volleyball skills, but the language barrier was kind of preventing you to lead because you can't communicate. So that was very tough for me. I was like, how am I going to make connection if I cannot make them smile or like tell a joke? So you live and learn, I guess I would say, in a sense that you try to do better, you're trying to grow. I encourage everyone on the marketing side, right? Take that athlete perception, like grow a little bit every day, and that really accumulates over time.
Totally. And speaking of time, I think we're right at the bottom of the hour here. Megan, any last thoughts or questions?
This has been great, Tamara. Thank you so much for joining us. I feel like I know I've gotten a couple of good ideas listening today, and definitely looking forward to keep in touch as you continue on your account-based journey. Thank you for sharing the early days of it with us and some of your lessons learned. And Brian, Michael, and John, thank you for joining us. And yeah, just a big thank you. And John, I'll turn it back to you to say goodbye.
And Tamara, thank you for waking up early on the West Coast to join us, and great lessons learned there. And definitely going to think about the athlete and the perseverance thing that you said there toward the end in particular. Next week, we are same time, same location. We're hosting the CMO of Zoom Info, Brian Law, who'll be joining us, and we'll be talking about all things data and their push toward account-based marketing as well. So with that, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Happy Friday, everyone. Bye.